Welcome, I'm Nina Gryphon, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. Today we'll talk about the Aries Ingress for 2023, which is basically the astrological mundane forecast for the next 12 months. First off, I wanted to say thank you to all of my patrons. I appreciate all of your support. If you would like to become a patron and get access to astrological and magical content early and in many cases exclusively, you can go to patreon.com/Nina Gryphon. At the highest tier, you can also get access to my monthly ebook, Magical Elections, which teaches you how and when to make astrological talismans. The Aries Ingress chart is a technique for determining key macro or political or weather events specific to a country or a city based on the chart location. Now, the Aries Ingress is the moment that the Sun enters the first minute of the first degree of the spring cardinal sign, which is Aries. And this chart, and the moment that the chart is set for, is the first second of spring in the Northern Hemisphere. And the indications in that chart show what is likely to happen in that location during the next 3 months, which is the spring season, but also the larger picture of the next 12 months. So the astrological year starts with the first day of spring, the Aries Ingress. The Aries Ingress also acts as an overarching summary of the year against which the seasonal Ingress charts are compared. Today we're going to look at the Aries Ingress set for Washington, D.C., which shows U.S. events for the spring season and the year as a whole. So first off, the ascendant and its ruling planet tell us about the condition of the country as a whole and the people during the period, the mood, people's level of well-being, and just the overall zeitgeist. You'll see that Virgo is on the ascendant, describing the country. So with Virgo, there's a strong focus on the economy, money, and food. The opposition from Saturn to the ascendant means that these things could be lacking. However, there's also a helpful trine from Venus in Taurus, indicating that things are not as dire as they seem, and there are some real pluses to balance out some of the real negatives. Now, Mercury rules the ascendant, describing the people, and you'll notice that Mercury is in the 8th house of fear and anxiety. Mercury is also combust of the Sun, which is a traditional signification of fear as well. Mercury, being the planet of thoughts, underscores the concept of fearful thoughts, anxiety, but also concerns about economy and money, because these things are ruled by Mercury, who rules commerce. There's also a fear of violence and war, since Mercury is in Aries, a sign ruled by Mars, the god of war. We'll come back to Mars later because he's very dominant in this chart. The Aries Ingress moon is always important. Here, the moon is in the 7th house, showing a focus on the other, usually meaning an opponent, an enemy, or rival. There could be an increase of tensions with a rival country, for example, but also a focus on an individual public enemy, someone who is the target of hatred of many people. Generally, it's not a great year for the people because the moon is sort of a co-significator of the people. The moon is not in major dignity, and this is true worldwide because, of course, I should note that the Aries Ingress locations, the zodiacal placements of the planets are the same. It's just that their house locations will be different. The moon has almost no light left, and she is applying to square the ruler of the 8th house, Mars. Now, that is location specific. This could mean an increase in mortality, certainly an increase in fear, and also an increase in debt. Remember that Mercury rules commerce and money and financial transactions. And so if Mercury in the 8th and the moon squaring the ruler of the 8th could show a increase in debt on an individual as well as a collective or commercial level. Generally, worldwide, the moon applying to square Mars, though, could mean increased deaths and mortality and danger. The moon in Pisces with Neptune strongly points toward a focus on the ocean, water, and especially islands and peninsulas, watery places, as focal points of conflict for this year. Saturn in Pisces as well suggests disease, deprivation, as well as suffering associated with these types of places. One way to interpret this strong 8th house emphasis is that a powerful person may die this year. Mercury also rules the 10th house, and it is combust in the 8th house, so Mercury could be a politician, a broadcaster or podcaster or journalist, like a YouTube personality, an intellectual or scholar, or even a judge. Now let's talk about Mars. Mars is in the 10th house in this chart, and according to medieval techniques, he would be Lord of the Year, which is the planet that best describes the theme of the year, as well as the overall tendencies and mood for the year. Mars, of course, brings violence, war, and crime. It is also in Gemini, which is traditionally the sign of the US, while also angular in the 10th house in Washington, D.C. So this could be an indication of conflict, but it could be an indication of victory for the US or representatives of state power. So if the US gets into a conflict this year, it could be actually a very favorable outcome for the United States. Now, Mars also widely squares the moon in the 7th, as we discussed, suggesting a fight with enemies of the country, because of course this is the 7th house, whether they're individuals or groups or even other countries. Mars square to Neptune shows possible deception or lack of clarity around the conflict. It could also have something to do with water or watery places like islands or peninsulas. Now, Mars in Gemini specifically, especially when it's occidental of the Sun, meaning it rises after the Sun, indicates the hiding and flight of intellectuals, writers, journalists, lawyers, and perhaps politicians. These people are hiding, they are on the run. With Mars in the 10th, this seems connected to governmental action or repression. Again, it could be at different levels of governmental authority, local, state, as well as federal. Speaking of war and conflict, Saturn is oriental of the Sun in this chart, which means he rises before the Sun. And it is said that in Pisces, this indicates the killings of retribution among the wealthy. The fact that Saturn is direct indicates increased religiosity, and the fact that it's happening in the 6th house suggests that these things might be happening at some distance from the United States, perhaps less so inside the country. So we could actually be seeing something that impacts the United States, but it's not actually happening within the border. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about fixed stars. There's an important fixed star that is present here, and it is called Sheraton. It's a fixed star at about 4 degrees of Taurus in longitude, and it's one of the stars in the horn of the Aries constellation. Here it conjoins the North Node and Venus, which rules the 2nd and 9th houses in DC. Now, according to the medieval astrologer Abu Mashar, assets of the wealthy and the nobles will be destroyed. They will judge themselves to be paupers, with grief and malign infirmities will happen to them in the neck and ears like catarrh and deafness. So, because it's with the 2nd house ruler, because Sheraton impacts the 2nd house ruler, assets of the wealthy are going to be destroyed. And I find this quite fascinating given that we're already seeing a major bank failure today, that of Silicon Valley Bank. Now, Venus also rules the 9th house, and in fact, she is in the 9th, so she will also have important things to say about areas of the 9th. Because of this, it is said, according to Abu Mashar, that impediment and destruction on religious believers in churches, mosques, temples, as well as the harm of foreign journeys. Now, we don't necessarily mean everybody's foreign journey, but particularly foreign journeys that are important, that might be public in some way, and so on. So there definitely seem to be some issues with, even though there is increased religiosity, there is also some real harm and some problems that come to various faiths. Now, it is also said that morals of the people are especially destroyed that year, and judgments, like judgments of judges, could be malignant. So we could see some very problematic court case law. And this could be, for example, from the Supreme Court, but not exclusively. This evil star could also be harmful to judges because they are also ruled by the 9th house. They are 9th house types of people. So we could see some kind of high-profile judges have some serious problems this year. Finally, let's spend a little bit of time talking about the weather. Saturn in Pisces is said to bring the destruction of ships at sea. Now today that could include other man-made aquatic vehicles and structures like submarines and pipelines or even dams. Generally, Mars in Gemini is going to bring moderate amounts of rain overall, but Jupiter in Aries, on the other hand, is said to bring fine weather and less rain. So in the DC area where this chart is cast for, Mars would normally predominate due to his angularity. So to summarize, you can see it's a fairly volatile year, and the indications that we discussed today While some are specific to the US, many of them are actually going to be global, like the fact that we have the moon in Pisces with Neptune, for example, and that the moon applies to square Mars. That will be the case everywhere in the world, and it's going to have an impact. There is going to be a fair amount of conflict, instability, and a tendency perhaps to panic and be anxious. Mercury, for example, is going to be combust everywhere in the world. So even though he's not the ruler of the first everywhere in the world, it's still going to add a certain amount of anxiety and difficulty and a feeling of entrapment for a lot of people. All right, thanks for watching. I'm Nina Gryphon, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel.